Since the beginning, the forces of light and darkness have engaged in an eternal war, the great conflict, whose victor will rise from the apocalyptic ashes to hold sway over all creation. To this end, the angels of the high heavens adhere to strict militaristic disciplines. Seraphim warriors strike at the enemies of light with swords imbued with righteous wrath and justice. The angels believe that only absolute discipline can properly restore order to the myriad realms, while the demonic denizens of the burning hells hold that absolute chaos is the true nature of all things. The battles of the great conflict rage across both time and space, often infringing upon the very fabric of reality itself. From the crystal arch at the very heart of the high heavens to the arcane hell-forge of the underworld, the warriors of these eternal realms journey to wherever their timeless conflict carries them. The legendary deeds of the heroes of the realms beyond elicit both veneration and insight. The greatest of these heroes was Iswal, lieutenant to the archangel Tyrael, and bearer of the angelic rune blade Azurath. He once led a fierce attack upon the Hellforge as the creation of the dark demon blade Shadowfang was nearing completion. His quest was to destroy both wielder and weapon, a charge that he was destined never to complete. Iswal was overcome by the legions of chaos and tragically was lost to the darkness. His fate stands as testament to the fact that angels and demons alike shall fearlessly enter into any domain, so long as their hated enemies dwell within. Although the great conflict burned hotter and longer than any of the stars in the sky, neither side could gain dominion over the other for long. Both factions sought some way to turn the tides of the war to their favor. With the ascension of man and his mortal realm, the great conflict ground to a mysterious halt. Both armies paused in a breathless stalemate, waiting to see to whose side man would eventually turn. Mortals had the unique ability to choose between darkness and light, and it was held that this would be the deciding factor in the outcome of the great conflict. Thus, the agents of the nether realms descended to the mortal realm to vie for the favor of man. The coming of the great conflict to the mortal realm is known as the Sin War. Angels and demons, disguising themselves while traveling amongst men, attempted to secretly lure mortals to their respective causes. Over time, the forces of darkness discovered that mortals responded much more to brute force than to subtle coercion, and so began to terrorize man into submission. The angels fought to defend humanity against this demonic oppression, but all too often their austere methods and severe punishments succeeded only in alienating those whom they sought to protect. The violent battles of the Sin War occurred often, but they were seldom witnessed by the prying eyes of man. Only a few enlightened souls were aware of the supernatural beings that walked amongst the huddled masses of humanity. Powerful mortals arose and accepted the challenge of the Sin War, allying themselves with both sides in the great conflict. The legendary deeds of these great mortal warriors served to earn both the respect and hatred of the netherworlds. Although lesser demons kneeled before those possessing power and strength, they also cursed the very existence of mortal man. Many of these fiends believed that the deadlock brought about by the emergence of man was a perverse offense to their higher role in the great scheme of things. This jealousy of man led to harsh, atrocious acts of violence by the demons against the mortal realm. Some men learned of this deep hatred and used it against the denizens of the underworld. One such mortal, Horazan the summoner, delighted in summoning demons and then breaking them to his will. Horazan, along with his brother Bartuk, were members of the Eastern Mage clan, known as the Vizirai. This mystic clan studied the ways of demons and had catalogued their lore for generations. Empowered by this knowledge, Horazan was able to take the work of the Vizirai and pervert it for his demented purposes. The denizens of hell sought revenge against this bold mortal, but Horazan managed to keep himself well protected within his arcane sanctuary. Bartok, the brother of Horazan, was eventually lured to the side of darkness. He was granted exceptional strength and longevity, and fought alongside the legions of hell against the cursed Vijarai, and eventually his own brother during the Sin War. Although Bartok was renowned amongst the warriors of many realms, his dominance in battle came with a terrible price. An insatiable lust for mortal blood pervaded his every thought and deed. Bartok soon became as fond of bathing in the blood of his enemies as he did of shedding it, and in time he came to be known only as the Warlord of Blood. Seven is the number of the powers of hell, and seven is the number of the great evils. Duriel, the Lord of Pain. Andariel, the Maiden of Anguish. Belial, the Lord of Lies. Asmodan, the Lord of Sin. These are the true names of the lesser of the great evils. For ages uncounted, each have ruled over their own domains within the burning hells, seeking absolute dominion over their infernal brethren. As the lesser four continuously vied for the control of those forces that dwelled within their realms, the greater three held absolute power over the whole of hell. The lesser four used dark and evil measures in their quest for power, and herein begins the legend of the Dark Exile. Mephisto, the Lord of Hatred. Baal, the Lord of Destruction. Diablo, the Lord of Terror. These are the prime evils of hell that wielded their power as a dark, sovereign triumvirate. The three brothers ruled over the lesser four by brutal force and malicious cunning. Being the eldest and strongest of the evils, the three brothers were responsible for countless victories against the armies of the light. Although they never held sway over the high heavens for long, the three were justly feared by enemies and subjects alike. With the ascension of man and the subsequent standstill of the great conflict, the three brothers began to devote their energies to the perversion of mortal souls. The three realized that man was the key to victory in the war against heaven, and thus altered their rigid agendum that they had propagated since the beginning. This change caused many of the lesser evils to question the authority of the three, and so brought about a great rift between the prime evils and their servitors. In their ignorance, the lesser evils began to believe that the three were afraid to continue the war with heaven. Frustrated by the cessation of the war, Asmodan and Belial saw the situation as their chance to overthrow the prime evils and take control of hell for themselves. The two demon lords made a pact with their minor brethren, assuring them that the wretched plague of humanity would not deter the ultimate victory of the sons of hell. Asmodan and Belial devised a plan to end the stalemate, achieve victory in the Sin War, and ultimately ride the bloody crest of the great conflict straight into the very arms of Armageddon. Thus, a great revolution was set into motion as all of hell went to war against the three brothers. The brothers fought with all of the savagery of the underworld, and to their credit, annihilated a third of hell's treacherous legions. In the end, however, they were overcome by the Horned Death, led by the traitors Asmodan and Belial. The prime evils, weakened and bodiless, were banished to the mortal realm, where Asmodan hoped that they would remain trapped forever. Asmodan believed that with the three set loose upon humanity, the angels would be forced to turn their focus upon the mortal plane, thus leaving the gates of heaven abandoned and defenseless. Those few demons who still pledged allegiance to the three brothers fled the wrath of Asmodan and Belial, escaping to the realm of man to seek out their lost masters. As the war fires died out upon the battlefields of hell, Asmodan and Belial began to argue over which of them held the higher authority. The pact that they had made quickly fell to ashes, as the two demon lords took up arms against each other. The legions of hell that remained were polarized behind either warlord, launching themselves into a bloody civil war that has lasted to this day. Seven is the number of... In the ancient days, before the rise of the Western empires, the dark and terrible entities known as the Three Evils were exiled to the world of man. These eternal entities wandered throughout the waking world and fed upon the lusts of men, leaving chaos and attrition in their wake. The evils turned father against son and prompted many great nations into brutal and petty wars. Their exile from hell left them with an insatiable hunger to bring suffering and pain to all those who would not kneel before them. And so the three brothers ravaged the lands of the Far East for countless centuries. Eventually, a secretive order of mortal magi was gathered together by the enigmatic archangel Tyrael. These sorcerers were to hunt the three evils and put an end to their vicious rampage. The order, known as the Horadrim, consisted of wizards from the diverse and numerous mage clans of the East. Employing disparate magical practices and disciplines, this unlikely brotherhood succeeded in capturing two of the brothers within powerful artifacts called soul stones. Mephisto and Baal, trapped within the swirling spiritual constraints of the soul stones, were then buried beneath the dunes of the desolate eastern sands. The powers of hatred and wanton destruction seemed to diminish in the east as a nervous peace began to settle over the land. Yet for many decades the Horadrim continued their grim search for the third brother, Dlablo. They knew that if the Lord of Terror was left untamed, there could never be any lasting peace within the realm of humanity. The Horadrim followed in the wake of terror and anarchy that spread throughout the western lands. After a great battle which claimed the lives of many brave souls, the Lord of Terror was captured and imprisoned within the last of the soul stones by a group of Horadrim monks led by the initiate Jared Kane. These monks carried the cursed stone to the land of Kandaras and buried it within a secluded cave near the river Talsand. Above this cave, the Horadrim constructed a great monastery from which they could continue to safeguard the soul stone. As ages passed, the Horadrim constructed a network of catacombs beneath the monastery to house the earthly remains of the martyrs of their order. Generations passed in Kandaras, and the numbers of the Horadrim slowly dwindled. With no quests left to undertake, and too few sons to sustain their guardianship, the once powerful order faded into obscurity. Eventually, the great monastery that they had built fell to ruins as well. Although villages grew and thrived around the shell of the old monastery, no one knew of the dark, secret passageways that stretched into the cold earth beneath it. None could have dreamed of the burning red gem that pulsed within the labyrinth's heart. Years after the last of the Horadrim had died, a great and prosperous society grew in the lands of the West. As time wore on, many Eastern pilgrims settled in the lands surrounding Kandaras, and soon established small, self-contained kingdoms. A few of these kingdoms bickered with Kandaras over holdings of property or routes of trade. These squabbles did little to upset the lasting peace of the West, and the great northern kingdom of Westmarch proved to be a strong ally of Kandaras, as the two lands steadily engaged in ventures of barter and commerce. During this time, a bold new religion of the light, known as Zakarim, began to spread throughout the kingdom of Westmarch and into many of its northern principalities. Zakarum, founded in the Far East, implored followers to enter into the light and forsake the darkness that lurked within their souls. The people of Westmarch adopted the statutes of Zakarum as their sacred mission in the world. Westmarch began to turn towards its neighbors, expecting them to embrace this new beginning as well. Tensions rose between the kingdoms of Westmarch and Condaros, as the priests of Zakarum began to preach their foreign dogma, whether they were welcomed or not. It was then that the great northern lord Leoric came unto the lands of Condaros, and in the name of Zakarum declared himself king. Leoric was a deeply religious man, and had brought many knights and priests with him that comprised his Order of the Light. Leoric and his trusted adviser, the Archbishop Lazarus, made their way to the city of Tristram. Leoric appropriated the ancient, decrepit monastery on the outskirts of town for his seat of power, and renovated it to match its time-lost glory. Although the free people of Condaros were not pleased with being placed under the sudden rule of a foreign king, Leoric served them with justice and might. Eventually, the people of Condaros grew to respect the kind Leoric, sensing that he sought only to guide and protect them against the oppression of darkness. Not long after Leoric took possession of Condaros, a power, long asleep, awakened within the dark recesses beneath the monastery. Sensing that freedom was within his grasp, Dlablo entered the nightmares of the archbishop and lured him into the dark subterranean labyrinth. In his terror, Lazarus raced throughout the abandoned hallways until he at last came to the chamber of the burning soul-stone. No longer in command of his body or spirit, he raised the stone above his head and uttered words long forgotten in the realm of mortals. His will destroyed, Lazarus shattered the soul-stone upon the ground. Dlablo once again came into the world of man. Although he was released from his imprisonment within the soul-stone, the Lord of Terror was still greatly weakened from his long sleep, and required an anchor to the world. Once he had found a mortal form to wear, he could begin to reclaim his vastly depleted power. The great demon weighed the souls residing in the town above, and chose to take the strongest of them, that of King Leoric. For many months King Leoric secretly fought the evil presence that twisted his thoughts and emotions. Sensing that he had been possessed by some unknown evil, Leoric hid his dark secret from his priests, hoping that somehow his own devout righteousness would be enough to exorcise the corruption growing inside him. He was sorely mistaken. Dlablo stripped away the core of Leoric's being, burning away all honor and virtue from his soul. Lazarus, too, had fallen under the sway of the demon, keeping close to Leoric at all times. Lazarus worked to conceal the plans of his new master from the Order of Light, hoping that the demon's power would grow, well concealed amongst the servants of Zakarum. The priests of Zakarum and the citizenry of Condaros recognized the disturbing change within their liege. His once proud and rugged form became distorted and deformed. King Leoric became increasingly deranged and ordered immediate executions of any who dared to question his methods or authority. Leoric began to send his knights to other villages to bully their townspeople into submission. The people of Condaros, who had once grown to see great honor in their ruler, began to call Leoric the Black King. Driven to the brink of madness by the Lord of Terror, King Leoric slowly alienated his closest friends and advisers. Lochdonan, captain of the Knights of the Order of Light, an honored champion of Zakarum, tried to discern the nature of his king's deteriorating spirit. Yet at every turn the Archbishop Lazarus would waylay Lochdonan and admonish him for questioning the actions of the king. As tensions grew between the two, Lazarus charged Lochdonan with treason against the kingdom. To the priests and knights of Leoric's court, The prospect of Lochdonan committing treason was ridiculous. Lochdonan's motives were honorable and just, and soon many began to question the reason of their once beloved king. Leoric's madness was growing more obvious with each passing day. Sensing that the advisers of the court were becoming increasingly suspicious of foul treachery, Lazarus desperately sought to contain the eroding situation. The archbishop masterfully convinced the delusional Leoric that the kingdom of Westmarch was plotting against him, secretly planning to dethrone him and annex Condoras into its own lands. Leoric flew into a rage and summoned his advisers to his side. Manipulated by the archbishop, the paranoid king declared a state of war between the kingdoms of Condoras and Westmarch. Leoric ignored the warnings and admonishments of his advisers, and the royal army of Condoras was ordered to the north to engage in a war that they did not believe in. Lochdonan was appointed by Lazarus to lead the armies of Condoras into Westmarch. Although Lochdonan argued against the necessity of the coming conflict, he was honor-bound to uphold the will of his king. Many of the high priests and officials were forced to travel to the north as emissaries on errands of diplomatic urgency as well. The desperate ploy of Lazarus had succeeded in sending many of the king's more troublesome advisers to their certain deaths. Both armies paused in a breathless stalemate, waiting to see to whose side man would eventually turn. Mortals had the unique ability to choose between darkness and light, and it was held that this would be the deciding factor in the outcome of the great conflict. Thus, the agents of the nether realms descended to the mortal realm to vie for the favor of man. The coming of the great conflict to the mortal realm is known as the Sin War. Light and darkness have engaged in an eternal war, the great conflict, whose victor will rise from the apocalyptic ashes to hold sway over all creation. To this end, the angels of the high heavens adhere to strict militaristic disciplines. Seraphim warriors strike at the enemies of light with swords imbued with righteous wrath and justice. The angels believe that only absolute discipline can properly restore order to the myriad realms, while the demonic denizens of the burning hells hold that absolute chaos is the true nature of all things. The battles of the great conflict rage across both time and space, often infringing upon the very fabric of reality itself. From the crystal arch at the very heart of the high heavens to the arcane hell-forge of the underworld, the warriors of these eternal realms journey to wherever their timeless conflict carries them. The legendary deeds of the heroes of the realms beyond elicit both veneration and insight. The greatest of these heroes was Iswal, lieutenant to the archangel Tyrael, and bearer of the angelic rune blade Azurath. He once led a fierce attack upon the Hellforge as the creation of the dark demon blade Shadowfang was nearing completion. His quest was to destroy both wielder and weapon, a charge that he was destined never to complete. Iswal was overcome by the legions of chaos, and tragically was lost to the darkness. His fate stands as testament to the fact that angels and demons alike shall fearlessly enter into any domain, so long as their hated enemies dwell within. Although the great conflict burned hotter and longer than any of the stars in the sky, neither side could gain dominion over the other for long. Both factions sought some way to turn the tides of the war to their favor. With the ascension of man and his mortal realm, the great conflict ground to a mysterious halt. Since the beginning, the forces of